Hello there, Oddimus Prime here. Just a quick introduction to this episode. This is originally recorded for TFUKCON 2024, part of our 40th anniversary celebration. This is an interview with Bob Budiansky, who's a very celebrated and integral part of the Transformers history. I'm sure you've heard of him before. The interview was created to be shown at the event, so it's a little different from our normal fare. So please listen up and enjoy. I will now pass over to the interview. Thank you for listening.
Hi everyone, it's Primetime Moff here at TFUKCON 2024, and I am absolutely honoured to be joined by the wonderful Bob Budiansky as we celebrate the 40th anniversary of Transformers. Who better to talk to about the origins of the Transformers and the legacy it has given? So without further ado, I'd like to say hello to Bob. Hi, Bob.
Hello to you, Graham, and hello to you, Simon. Can I call you Graham or Simon, or should I call you by your...
No, Graham. Go for Graham and Simon. Yeah.
Fine, okay. Yes, well, nice to meet you both. Nice to meet both of you guys.
Okay, Bob. So what I'd like to do, first of all, is chat to you about your early career. I'm fairly confident you didn't sit in school and think, I'm going to write about robots. So I'd like to know what your intention was. What did you think your life was going to be? And then we'll chat about how you fell into Transformers.
Actually, in school, it was more likely I would be building robots than writing about them, because I have a degree in civil engineering.
Nice.
And then I went on to graduate school for transportation engineering, for a master's in transportation engineering.
Oh.
And while I was doing all of that, I was interested in being an artist. And I was an artist on our college newspaper for all 5 years that I was there. And I was a graphic arts editor the last few years. And eventually, one of my co-editors, he graduated the same year I did, and he got an entry-level editorial position. He got an entry-level editorial position at Marvel Comics when he graduated. And he knew of my interest in comics. And so he invited me down to the office a couple times during my breaks, my holiday breaks, when I was a grad student. And I met some of the people there. And eventually he quit his job to move on to what he really wanted to do. And he said, Bob, do you want to interview for my job? And I said, sure, I'll interview for your job. So I interviewed for his job. I had a half hour. My college was about 400 miles from New York City, where Marvel was located. So I just did a telephone interview with my future boss, his boss, Larry Lieber, and Stanley's brother, for those of you out there who don't know that. So Larry interviewed me over the phone for about a half hour, said, gee, I really would like to meet you in person, but these guys here know you, and they say nice things about you. That my friend and a couple of other people I'd met there on previous occasions. So I got the job, and I dropped out of grad school to take the entry-level editorial position at Marvel Comics. That's how I got my start there. And interestingly enough, to your audience perhaps, is that Larry Lieber was the head of the Marvel British department, and I was his editorial assistant. So basically, the British department back then, we were responsible for preparing already printed material, already published Marvel Comics material, and preparing it for the British market, which was very different than the American market in terms of publication schedule, in terms of we had color comics, they had black and white comics, in terms of spelling of a lot of words. So all of these things needed to be adjusted so that the American comics could be reprinted for the British market. And as the editorial assistant, I was involved in getting a lot of that prepared. And there you go.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I hadn't heard that part before. I've heard you talk before that there certainly was some tweaks that happened in the British comics that came in after it was too late to fix something in the American, but I hadn't heard that you were that kind of involved in it at the very beginning. So it's really interesting to know that you were involved in, I guess that was not just Transformers, that had been other comics as well.
Oh, this is before Transformers existed. This was 1976 when I started. Well, so Transformers didn't come along to me anyway until 1983. So this had nothing to do with Transformers. This was reprinting the Avengers and Planet of the Apes and Spider-Man. And, whatever was coming out at Marvel at that time was being reprinted for the British marketplace.
I think it's quite interesting because, you talked there about changing the language, and obviously there's certain words that are spelt differently from ourselves and over there. And I think nowadays things are so quick to go out that they don't take that time to kind of have that change. Whereas obviously back then you'd have had time to go, well, actually let's, localize it and take a bit of time for it. So that's quite interesting. You said there about, you were reading comics and interested in comics. It'd be remiss of me not to ask what you were interested in before you joined Marvel. What was the comics you were reading at the time? What were you enjoying?
Well, I grew up reading comics. So from the age of like 5 years old till I got to high school, I was about 13 or 14 years old. I was into comics, and by the time I was about maybe 8 years old, I had my own allowance money, so I can go out and buy my own comics. I have two older brothers, so they would bring comics back to our home, and I would read them when I was really young. I look at them anyway if I wasn't able to read yet. And so once I became old enough to buy my own, I became a real collector. But then when I got to high school, I stopped completely. I figured, okay, time for me to move on. I'm in high school now. And then I got to college, and I got reintroduced by a friend, another fellow artist in the college newspaper. Took some comics I didn't know existed, and specifically Conan the Barbarian that Marvel was putting out. And I was just amazed because it was so different than anything I had experienced when I was young. When I was younger and actively collecting. I was all superhero stuff back then that I was interested in. This was, a complete left turn from what I was familiar with. And it was much more adult, and it was much more interesting to me. And the stories are great. The artwork was beautiful. The artists back then were Barry Windsor-Smith, transitioning to the beat. Excuse me, I got to handle a beat. Hold on a second.
No, that's okay.
Sorry about that. No, it's beep anymore. Anyway, I was saying, so I was really entranced by these comics. The stories were great. The artwork by Barry Windsor-Smith at that time, the artwork was transitioning over to John Buscema. Just floored me. I was just so amazed at the sophistication and the skill of these artists, and the stories were terrific. So that's what got me back into comics. And then I branched out a little bit more from that. This is like early to mid 70s. So I got into Jim Starlin's Warlock comics. Those are pretty cool back then. I saw it, and a couple other things, a couple of other odds and ends. But I didn't become like a heavy collector back then. I just picked a couple of different titles, like I mentioned.
Yeah,
all of them. Yeah.
Brilliant. So I think I can relate to that. I had similar bits of falling away from comics and then picking up. It was Mark Millar's run on Swamp Thing. A friend told me to read it, and I was like, Swamp Thing? And then it was just the artwork and the stories in it were so different to the comics I remembered as a kid. It brought me back in, so I can absolutely relate to that. So let's talk about Transformers. Let's talk about that fateful conversation that brings you into the world of Transformers. I'd like to hear your side of it. And I know people have heard it and the toys it made us and things, but it's lovely to hear it from yourself. So tell us a little bit about how that conversation went down.
Okay, well, so I just celebrated not that I did much to celebrate, but I just celebrated my 40th anniversary on Transformers. It's only 1983 now. It's only 2023. For most people, it'll be next year, but for me, started in November of 1983. So at the time, I was a full Marvel editor. Jim Shooter was the editor-in-chief. And what I'm going to talk about now all happened before I got involved. So at some point, some executives from Hasbro contacted Marvel. I had nothing to do with any of this, and asked Marvel to develop this new toy property into a storyline. They had done the exact same thing a couple of years earlier to much success with G.I. Joe. They came to Marvel, specifically Larry Hama, who was an editor at the time. And they came to Marvel, and Marvel developed it. G.I. Joe became a huge success in all different ways. So they wanted to repeat that formula with this new property, Transformers. So obviously, for those of you who know the Transformers history, Hasbro at this time had made a couple of couple of deals with Japanese toy manufacturers, Bandai and Takara, and they were basically taking these already existing toys, rebranding them for the American market as Transformers. So they came to Jim Shooter, write a storyline, develop these toys into characters. Jim himself was the person who wrote the original treatment for Transformers. He wrote about a 6-page treatment, and I guess it got Hasbro's approval. And then he hired one of our senior editors, one of Marvel's senior editors at the time, to develop the characters. So the initial list of characters were 26 characters, Autobots and Decepticons. And for reasons that I'm not familiar with, because I still wasn't involved, Jim did not approve of what this senior editor handed in developing these characters, the names, their backgrounds, et cetera, et cetera. He wasn't interested in what he was getting. And rather than go back to that editor-writer and ask him to make revisions, he just wanted to move on and find somebody else to do the work. So this was, we have a big holiday here in the United States called Thanksgiving, which we celebrate the last Thursday of November. This is the week before. And usually that time of year, people who are working on staff at Marvel were interested in wrapping up whatever projects they had to get wrapped up, getting books out the door to go to the printers or whatever, so they can get on their plane or their bus or their car and go home for the weekend and go for a long week to visit the family for Thanksgiving. So this is the week before, a few days before Thanksgiving, week before Thanksgiving. And Jim Shooter decided at that time that he needed to turn some work into Hasbro right before Thanksgiving, like that Monday or Tuesday before Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving was on Thursday. So the week before, he's going down to the different editors and asking them, hey, I need somebody to take these 26 toys and turn them into characters. And I need it by Monday. And this was like on the Wednesday before, Wednesday, maybe Thursday. And so he asked Larry Hama, who had already done the same thing for G.I. Joe. And Larry turned him down. He asked a couple of other editors who had a lot of writing credits. They turned him down. And finally, out of a complete act of desperation, because I did not have a reputation as a writer editor. I was an artist editor. That was more my background. But I did have a little bit of writing in my experience in Marvel, mostly plotting stories. He came to me and he said, Bob, can you take these characters and turn something in on Monday? So I said, sure, I'm not doing anything over the weekend. I was a local boy. I didn't have to travel, across the country to visit my family. So I lived in New York City. I grew up in New York City. So anyway, so over the weekend, I took the 26 characters that I was given. We actually kept 2 of the names from my predecessor on this. That was Optimus Prime and Prowl. Anyway, I developed names for the other 24. I wrote profiles for all 26, turned them in Monday morning. Jim Shooter liked them. He moved them on to Hasbro for their approval. Certain tweaks were needed because all the names had to go through a legal approval process. So a couple of names got bounced. But eventually, that's what got me onto the property. It was just like I did this, and Jim liked it, and Hasbro liked it, and then I was the guy for like the next 5 years, 5+ years, working on Transformers and developing new characters and expanding the mythology and writing a comic book, etc. So that's how I got my start. That one moment where I said yes to Jim Shooter.
I think that's always an interesting bit. In modern age, I think a lot of people turn opportunities down because they're maybe focused on I've got this holiday coming up, or I've got something going on. When actually, these opportunities, they don't come around often, and actually saying yes to something and taking that chance, look at what can come off the back of it. I always think it's interesting, and I could be wrong, but if I remember right, that one of the names was for Bumblebee was for Goldbug, which obviously then come back later on. So I know there was obviously going to be revisions to the names you submitted. Is there any that stick out that you think, I wish we had stuck with that name rather than going with what you changed it to?
Well, I know a couple of names that were changed, and they would probably changed for the better. Like I remember, I don't remember the name. I'd have to look it up, but I don't want to waste everybody's time. But the name I turned in originally for the character who became Ravage maybe it was Stalker.
Yeah, Stalker. I remember.
That got
hearing
rejected
from it.
for whatever reasons, and I came up with Ravage, which I think is a far superior name.
Yeah.
And you probably heard the story, like Megatron was initially rejected by Hasbro, and I realized very early on that this was their property and they could do whatever they want with it. But so that was a pretty cool sounding name. Why are they rejecting it? And so I inquired, like, I understand you guys, you make the decisions, but what was wrong with Megatron? And the response was, well, we thought it was too scary sounding, which I thought meant it was the right name. I hit the jackpot on that one. So I pointed out to them as gently as possible, the Hasbro execs. I said, well, he's the main bad guy. He's supposed to sound scary. And they apparently hadn't looked at it that way before. And with a convincing argument, they changed their mind. So they kept Megatron, which I still think is the best name I came up with in all the years I've worked.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I think if the Hasbro execs think it's scary, you've won a watch, because the kids are going to think it's scary. Right. And as you say, that's what you're looking for. You're not looking for them to be friendly. You're looking for them to be scary.
Well, I learned that was probably one of my earlier moments where I learned this lesson, which is when we bring people from the outside into Marvel, they don't look at things necessarily the way we look at it. And sometimes, if possible, it's helpful to educate them. Like, hey, the bad guy is supposed to be scary, or bringing in an artist who has a completely different kind of background than drawing comics and say, yeah, you do great what you do, but if you want to do Marvel, you got to do it a little bit different. You got to do it this way, and it works really well when people are open to hearing our point. I mean, like you're working for Marvel. There's a reason Marvel, is successful at what it does, and not to say everybody doesn't has to do the same exact thing as everybody else, but these are the things that help make it work. To think along these lines. Yeah. So in that case, Hasbro was very receptive to my gentle rebuke of their decision. That's
yeah. And if I remember right, I heard a story about in that first couple of issues that when it was only going to be 4 issues. And they bringing Spider-Man in, and Hasbro didn't really want that because somebody else was selling that toy. And the Hasbro are doing this. They're thinking with their head and the selling the toys, whereas you're obviously, as editor, looking at how can I sell issues. Spider-Man will sell issues of the comic, and then the classic workaround of bringing in the Black Spider-Man, which was, I imagine at that time, incredibly cool, like in the pop culture, and the people are reading it. And more importantly for Hasbro, didn't have the toy license, so it was easier for them to say yes to. So it must have been an interesting kind of back and forth at that point to try and get that over the line.
Well, it was like you've pointed out, it was a kind of a surprise that they rejected Marvel's flagship character. Again, we're trying to sell comics and they're trying to sell toys. And it was beyond when I say our, I mean like myself and my writer who suggested involving Spider-Man. Beyond our imagination that anybody would reject Spider-Man, even if a rival toy company was selling Spider-Man toys. We're not promoting buying toys. We're promoting, buying the comic book. But that's how the toy company execs think. And so we actually, I give credit to my writer, which is the idea. The black costume Spider-Man had recently just been introduced in the Secret Wars comic book series. And so he suggested, well, why don't we offer them the black costume Spider-Man? That one's not licensed by another toy company. And that worked out. So sometimes you do have to learn to put yourself in the other guy's shoes and see it from that point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's an interesting way to look at it and how to get that kind of successful bit across the line. Now, the first few years, so they come to with that, what is a relative small selection of Transformers compared to where it ends up going. Those first few years where the toy line grew because of the wild success it was. It must have been interesting from your side, from Hasbro's, they're probably just thinking, well, this is great. Look at the money that's coming in, so much interest. That feeling of here's another character to introduce, and another character, and another. What was your kind of feeling to that, and how much did you pay attention to the hysteria and hype that was going around in the toy aisles at that time?
Well, okay, so I knew that the Transformers was very successful. Hasbro was coming up with new lines of toys every few months. There'd be another 20 to 30 toys. And underlying everything, and this may not have been as obvious to the average 10-year-old child who might have been buying a comic book at the time, but the whole purpose of the comic book was to sell toys. So when Hasbro introduced a whole new set of toys, I was obligated to somehow figure out a way to bring them into the storyline. And so initially, first couple of years of doing that, it was a creative challenge that I sort of relished. Like, okay, we have this original treatment, and it's very limiting, actually. If you read the treatment, it's like one spaceship full of these Autobots and Decepticons that just happen to all be in the same spaceship together. They crash land on Earth, and they wake up millions of years later, and they continue their battle. And so it's a very it's a very limited arrangement. You just have this one spaceship full of Transformers. So I had to come up with new and novel, new ways to introduce more characters, and I did. And then after a while, after a few years of this, it became a big burden. I have to not only figure out new ways to introduce new characters, but I have to make room for these characters in the stories, which means, I already have 70 characters. I can't keep showing the same old characters. I got to introduce new characters. So I have to sweep away anybody that I've been developing into some interesting character storyline and find ways to bring in a whole new set of characters. And after a while, I thought it became, for me, it was exhausting. It's like, this is,
You can imagine.
this is, it's challenging. I've risen to the challenge as much as I care to do, and now I think it's time for me to step aside and let somebody else deal with the magnitude of what's necessary to make this work. And so eventually I did. But anyway, but initially I was very happy to try coming up with new ideas. I mean, that's the whole purpose of being a writer on a comic book is to ideas. So I was happy with it for a couple of years.
But I suppose at that point you were, as you came into it, as you said, you weren't coming in as originally want to come in as a writer. You were coming in as the artist aspect of it. And I've heard you talk before about there was certain comic issue covers that you end up drawing yourself because you were kind of started it and you were like, I really want to get this point across. For example, the scraplets and how do I get this across? And then developing the cover and, the irony, not that I realised it as a child, but the only comics I still have from my childhood are actually ones that you drew the cover of, which is a compliment to yourself around. So it was issue 45 with Return of Circuit Breaker. There's something about that cover just always I loved it. And then Headmasters issue 1, I'm a huge Fort Max fan, so that was always.
You mean cover, right?
To be fair from you. Yes. So I've still got my personal one from my childhood, as I say, two comics, and I didn't have many of them, but that one just always something. Yeah, it was, for me, it's the opposite of what I think of when I think of Transformers, because it doesn't look like just robots fighting. There's some flair to it. So that's a personal favourite. And I think that's a really nice bit that shows you how much you invested in, some of the aspects of I'm going to get this done right. I'm going to make sure it's done my way. I think that's a really speaks volumes for that level of participation you had. But I can only imagine, what did you have 50, 51 issues you wrote? Trying to fit all those characters in that time. That's an incredible task that I don't think anybody nowadays and in your comics has ever had to face. They're picking and choosing what they want to do, and there'll be certain aspects putting in, but can't imagine anybody had that level of challenge that you did.
Is there a question there? I'm not sure.
No. Just a reflection of how well you did to combat that challenge. And I know that you had, many people, I've told you there how I enjoyed your comic cover, and you had many fans over the years of the writing and the comics you produced. But I believe a certain Stan Lee was one of those that wrote you a fan letter,
right,
to his thoughts.
He wrote a fan letter. I wrote a comic book called Decepticon Graffiti. And that was a story with issue 23 or 27, I forget. And he actually wrote a letter saying how much he enjoyed that story. It was like my editor and myself, we were like thrilled. Like, he actually picked up a Transformers comic. He's a very busy man, and he actually read it. And he actually took the time to write us a letter about it. So yeah, it was great. Yeah,
That's amazing.
Can't ask for higher praise from a letter from Stan.
No, absolutely no. I think there is that bit of that, taking the time to sit down and say, well done, I appreciate what you've done. It's a lost art these days. So, and again, as you can say, imagine at that time, Stan was a very busy man, so it must have felt great getting that letter in.
Yeah, sure did.
So you get to the point where you're starting to feel a bit overwhelmed and like you need a break. And I believe I read that it took you a little bit longer than you'd have liked to actually step away. I think you were challenging to try and get out of the Transformers universe for a little bit longer than you'd have liked. Talk to us about that kind of last wee run you had before you then left, and then we can chat about who you handed the reins over to.
Well, I was on the book till issue 55, and I probably wanted to get off the book like a full year before that. And I was going to my editor saying, hey, I really would like to move on. I'd like to make some time for some other ideas I wanted to develop. Just to digress for a moment, I was a full editor, but writing the Transformers was a freelance job. It's not something I did during my regular hours working at Marvel. So it was something I did on, in the evening when I got home, and on weekends. And so there's only so many hours in the day, and I wanted to do other things. So I was begging my editor, find another writer. And he said, nobody else, I can't imagine anybody else writing this book. It's he probably had a good point there. It's not an easy book to write. But eventually, I actually took a vacation. It was my first vacation, my first trip to England in February of 1989. And I'd already met Simon Furman on a couple of occasions when he came to the New York Marvel offices to visit. He was working for the Marvel UK offices at the time, and as perhaps a lot of your listeners know, Simon got his start on Transformers writing in between issues, fill-in issues between my stories being reprinted, and then there'd be a gap, and then he'd fill it in with a story that wouldn't conflict with anything I was doing, and then they go back to reprinting my next story or whatever. This all kind of goes back to what I started out saying a long time ago in this interview. I started in the Marvel British department, and part of what we had to do was adjust our books for the British publishing schedule. In America, comics came out usually once a month. In England, they came out once a week. So it just changed the whole publishing schedule for anything that was being reprinted, and there'd be gaps. And the British market would consume comics at a lot quicker pace than we were producing them, actually, because they were coming out 4 times a month on average, and we were coming out once a month. So anyway, the solution in the case of Transformers was to hire writers, and I think it was mostly Simon, who did fill-in issues. And I met Simon once or twice. And then I went to England, and we met for lunch while I was in London. And I said, Simon, would you like to take over writing the Transformers book? I'm kind of tired of writing it. And he didn't waste a second in saying, yes, I'll do it. And so I went back to my vacation ended. I went back to the Marvel offices, and I talked to my editor, Don Daly. And I said, Don, I got Simon Furman lined up to replace me. Is that okay with you? And he said, okay. And just as a side note, as the writer of the book, it's really not my job to hire the next writer. That's the editor's job, but it was fine, no problem. So I was able to eventually move off the book 55 with the final issue that I wrote.
Amazing. I imagine Simon still owes you a few drinks as a thank you for that.
Well, you bring up a good topic. So he does owe me drinks. That is true. I'm not sure if he paid for lunch. I forget. He said we had burgers and beer for lunch, which sounds about accurate. I don't know. We probably split the bill. I too obligated. But years later, he reprinted. He was in charge of reprinting like all the American comics. I'm not sure what else for Titan Books in the UK.
Yeah.
And so as the editor / packager of all these books, he contacted me and said, Bob, can you write like an introduction for a couple of issues that you worked, a couple of the reprint issues that you worked on? And do you have any other odds and ends, like cover sketches that we could show, things that fans would actually have this comic book here. See this comic? So I have the original cover sketch I didn't draw this. I have the original cover sketch I did draw, which I think I gave him to use in one of the books.
Amazing.
In the intro. So might have been that one, might have been something else. In any case, I provided him a couple of introductions, and I gave him a bunch of copies of sketches and things that I had lying around, and he didn't have any budget to pay me. So I said, okay, every time we get together, you owe me a beer. He's been paying up ever since. So, man of his word. He always owes me a beer anytime he sees me. We saw each other for a convention in August. We saw each other recently in August.
He's a lovely man. A big supporter of the TFUKCon, and when we were chatting about what we wanted to do next, his first suggestion was you need to speak to Bob. Bob's the man you need to speak to, and obviously he helped put this together. So thank you to Simon for that. I know he'll be listening as we're playing this. So thank you, Simon. Okay, so you move off of Transformers, and obviously your work in comics doesn't stop there. I know you moved on and you started to pitch your own idea of a Sleepwalker. So I'd like to kind of hear about your kind of then journey with the rest of kind of more comics post Transformers.
All right, Sleepwalker.
Fab. Oh, you are so prepared, Bob.
Yeah, I'm just next to all my stuff here, so I just have this pile of stuff. Anyway, so one of the things I wanted to do with my freelance time, my non-editorial time, was to develop this idea I had called Sleepwalker, and write it, to pitch it to Marvel and write it. So I was working on a treatment for that. I eventually pitched it to, at the time, Marvel had what was called a new project committee. So the new project committee consisted of a group of editors, and they would review proposals for different people and see if they had enough merit, so that they would then move it up to the editor-in-chief for his review. At the time, the editor-in-chief was now Tom DeFalco. So one of the ideas was my idea, which I brought to the meeting, new project committee. And by the way, for full transparency, I was the head of the new project committee. I was the editor who was the head of it. But because I was pitching the idea, I had to recuse myself. I did not evaluate my idea. I just gave it to the other editors. I didn't say, I'm in charge here. You got to approve it. I didn't say anything like that. It's all up to them, and they liked it. And so I moved it. So it was moved on to editor-in-chief Tom DeFalco, and he had some comments about making some changes. I made some changes to the treatment, and I resubmitted it, and he approved it, and it became a monthly comic book, which is, no small accomplishment back then at Marvel.
No,
anytime. Most of the books, not all of them, but most of the books that Marvel was coming out that were new were spin-offs of already existing books. Like X-Men was enormously popular, so there was Wolverine, X-Factor, X-Force, and so on and so forth, so on. So coming up with a brand new concept that had nothing to do with anything that pre-existed at Marvel and getting it published was, I felt very good that Marvel accepted it. So it lasted a couple of years, and I had a lot of fun writing. So anyway, that would not have been possible if I hadn't gotten off Transformers. Because there's only so many hours a day where I have time to do this kind of stuff. Yeah.
And it must have been enjoyable to write without the pressures of only been able to showcase a certain character for a certain amount of issues. I know you were a big fan of writing Blaster when it was Transformers, but you're only going to get a certain amount of time to write Blaster bits, whereas when you're doing your own book and your own character, you can kind of flesh it out more and spend a bit more time. I imagine that was an enjoyable process for you, considering what Transformers had been like.
Well, writing with Sleepwalker was an enjoyable process. Yes, it's my own creation, and I could kind of go whatever direction I wanted to go with Sleepwalker. Nobody was telling me, okay, got to push that character aside. We want to introduce 20 other Sleepwalkers, So I can create my own cast of characters. It was a lot of fun writing it.
Right. Okay, I think we're going to end our interview part just now. We're going to do some Q&As. We don't have a live audience, but we've got a couple of people from TFUKCon with some questions. If you don't mind, I was bringing them on, and they'll ask you a few questions before we wrap up. Would that be okay, Bob?
Sure.
Fantastic.
And I will give a warning ahead of time. If somebody asks me a question about a particular detail from 35 years ago, I don't remember it. I don't remember it.
Bob, I was telling a story to Simon before we started this, and I said that we spoke to Bob Skier, who worked on Beast Machines last year, and he was fantastic. Very similar in the aspect of it's still a job that he did so many years ago. I changed careers about 2 years ago, and I went to visit a friend, and she asked me a question, something that 2 years ago would have been like that, and in 2 years I didn't know what to say. I didn't know the answer. So I can only imagine if I struggled after 2 years, what it must be like for those minute details from all those years ago and the pressure you were under. So hopefully we have some good questions that will kind of be easier for you to answer rather than very specifics. But let Simon bring our guests on now.
I will admit all and see if they all turn up at the same time.
So, Bob, we have got Russ. Russell runs a fantastic YouTube channel called Toys R Russ. A very clever words, like he must be so glad his parents named him Russell. It made it easy to come up with a YouTube name. And then we have Andy and Jamie, who run a successful Friday night live Transformers conversation that often doesn't talk about Transformers. Sometimes G.I. Joe, Jamie. But the three of them are absolutely big fans and wanted the opportunity to come in and ask you a question or two. So we will start with who's on my screen first. So Russ, I'm going to open the floor to you.
Okay, thanks very much. So first and foremost, thanks very much for speaking to us, Bob. It's a great pleasure and honour to talk to you. My question is, obviously, we are coming up to the 40th year anniversary. Does it still surprise you that the brand that sort of you helped create is still getting more and more popular as the years go by? I mean, obviously, you've seen it grow, but I think it's growing exponentially now. And I know, obviously, nobody ever foreseen it or foresaw it, rather, shall we say, but does it surprise you that it is still getting bigger?
Well, I won't say it surprised me now. Okay. It surprised me maybe back in the 2000s when the announcement was made that Hollywood was going to produce a live action Transformers movie. That became a big franchise. And I think, as is readily apparent to anybody who follows media trends, once Hollywood and just businesses in general, once they latch on to something that has the potential to be a perennial franchise property, we can roll these out every year. There's going to be a fan base for it. There's no giving up on it. I mean, you look at it like the Star Wars, Star Trek, and Universal Monsters, and obviously DC and Marvel and Transformers. So it's just, and I think there's a never-ending search by these media companies for more franchises like the Transformers that they could then spin off into all of these properties, whether it's toys, cartoons, movies, you name it, comic books, and this just keep pumping it out forever. So the initial surprise is worn off, and the fact that the fact that it keeps growing doesn't surprise me, because that's what these companies are built to do. They're built to take a property and keep expanding it. When Disney bought Lucasfilm and Marvel and whatever other companies they bought, and spent billions of dollars, they didn't buy it just to like put it on a shelf somewhere. You know, they bought it to leverage it into as many commercial properties as they could. So yeah, the Transformers isn't thriving whatsoever anymore. But the fact that the the brand is still existing, yeah, that surprises me. I mean, not so much today, but when it, back 20 years ago, 15 years ago, it became clear that there was still a lot of life in Transformers. That really surprised me. I'll give you a little anecdote. So way back when I was working on Transformers in the 80s, I was dealing with a lot of different Hasbro executives, and obviously they worked for a toy company. I didn't. I didn't know anything about the toy industry. I remember one executive telling me, if a toy lasts 2 seasons, that means 2 Christmas holiday seasons. When you roll out a brand new toy, usually it comes out in they'll pitch it in the spring to toy stores when there was such a thing as toy stores back then. They'll pitch it out there, and then they'll get their orders, and then they'll go to China and they'll manufacture all these toys, and they'll be on the store shelves in time for the holiday season in the fall. Okay. For the last 2 seasons, that was considered a success. That's how they looked at it in the toy industry, right? So Transformers, I worked on it through '89, and the toys came out maybe a little bit longer than that. Then it died off. And so that was an enormous success by toy company standards, if you go by that little bit of information that I was given. And so the fact that it then came back in the later '90s with Beast Wars, and then became movie franchise, and I didn't expect any of that, and I certainly didn't expect that stories that I was writing back in the 1980s, and all I cared about was I got to finish this one up so I can start working on the next one. And then it was a very ephemeral sort of a thing to work on, writing comic books. You don't think about people going to be reprinting my comic books 30 and 40 years from now. They'll still be reprinting my comics and asking questions about stories I wrote from so long ago. That's exactly what's happened. So when I was writing these stories, I had no clue that anybody would care about it in 2023.
Lovely. Thanks very much.
Sure.
Right. Thank you, Russ. I'm going to bring you on now to Andy. Andy, nice to see you. What's up you? The floor's yours, sir.
Thank you very much for doing this. It's a pleasure to get to talk to you. And thank you for everything that you've done for Transformers and for the fandom. Question I was going to ask you is, if you were in charge of rebooting the Transformers in 2024, what changes would you make? And is there anything that you would really want to keep the same that you would definitely have to do again?
Well, okay, so I don't dwell a lot on Transformers and what I would have done or could have done or should have done, because I moved on from it in 1989, which is a long time ago already. So I don't have a great answer for that, but I do know that, given my experience working on the Transformers when I did, that Jim Shooter's initial treatment for the whole mythology that Transformers became, it was solid, but it was very constricting, and so I think I would have figured out ways to open it up more. So it wasn't that it just is these 2 bands of Autobots and Transformers, Autobots and Decepticons stuck on this one spaceship. That they're obviously over the years people have, including myself, have found other ways around that, so it's not so limiting, or have ignored it or whatever. I don't even know what people are doing today. Now, I know IDW just got the license for Transformers, and they're rebooting it on their own to some extent. I haven't really followed what they're doing, but I do have the impression that they're kind of starting from the beginning and doing whatever they want to do with it, which is fine. But to answer your question, I would find a way to have opened up the initial treatment so it wasn't so limited to that one spaceship.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Jamie, last but not least, the floor is yours, good sir.
Thank you. I just want to say, I'm actually still not seeing myself yet. Is that normal?
Oh, we can see your face.
Right, okay, we can see you. Okay.
Behind you with all of those.
Awesome. Well, first of all, I just wanted to say, thank you for being one of the progenitors of the Transformers franchise, one of the core people behind it, and creating a wonderful universe, which I've enjoyed for so long and will continue to enjoy. I've just got 2 sort of small questions, which should be hopefully easy to answer. And one of the first questions is thinking back to sort of Transformers issue 2, all those back in the golden era of the 1980s. Well, introducing himself to Sparkplug and Buster, Bumblebee says that his name is codename is, I am codename Bumblebee. I'm from the planet Cybertron. I'm in desperate need of fuel, and your son drove me here. Now, this idea that the names we know Transformers by are not their real names is something that we would very occasionally be revisited in future Transformers media. Did you have an idea what Transformer real names could be, and did you create some or had plans to do so at a later date?
No, I didn't give it much thought. So just to step back, like I mentioned, there was a previous writer before me who named some of them. And I think he might have been thinking along those lines because at least one or two of the names I've seen that he came up with were really weird names. And they weren't anything resembling English. So like Stars, the character that I named eventually Starscream, his original name was Ulchtar, Ulchtar, which has no meaning in our language. For I was like, no. But I think he may have been trying to go for like alien sounding names. I guess, I don't know if I was given a directive, or I don't remember, but I was just coming up with names where people might be able to relate to something in the name, not to call somebody Jamie or Andy or Russell or anything, but come up with names that have English sounding words in them so that people can potentially relate to these characters. So I don't know. I forget if I'm answering your question quite or not. But I never gave much thought. I never gave much thought to what their real alien names were. I was the editor of issue 1 through 4, so I don't remember exactly what went into our conversation with me and the writers. But if somebody wrote my code name is Bumblebee, that makes some kind of sense because on the surface, a lot of the stuff didn't make sense to me. Why do these alien creatures have names of things from our planet? But again, I had to come up with names that we could connect to in some fashion. So their real names were hidden, but their code names were things like Bumblebee and Ravage and Starscream. So why they get real names from us, I don't know. Why they even turned into creatures that are actually machines that we would recognize. They were robots in disguise. That was their motto, right? So a lot of the stuff early on, they used those disguises to effect, and then later on, I don't think it mattered. Like they were on other planets. They weren't even on Earth. Why are they turning into cars and jets? It didn't make any sense any longer. But you can't keep talking about the things that don't make sense because you're just pointing out the flaws in the concept when you're doing that.
And this other question is connected directly to that. Transformers are a different form of life, although robotic, sort of futuristic. In the early Marvel comics, they're also portrayed as sort of low or equivalent tech. What I mean by that is that Spike, Sparkplug, or Buster in the comics being able to fix and repair Transformers not understanding how to fully use and harvest Earth resources, slowing the uptake of how delicate organic life is. And it's almost like we're a dead end of their evolution, something unknown or some, reasons holding them back. Was this deliberate or advantageous due to the time period being the 80s because popular culture expectations at the time did not expect super advanced technology, and was humanity almost, you could say, a catalyst for Transformers evolution, like can you say combiners?
This is really deep.
I can't go out if you want. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I'm going to just take a step back. So as I was working on the Transformers, and like I said, I had to come up with new ways to create new Transformers. So I came up with the idea of the creation matrix, and it made me think, like, what is life when it's robotic life? Why is this considered life? And it made me think, like, I have a science background, so it made me think, like, well, we're all machines. Okay, all of us are machines. We just work differently than robotic type of machines. we work with biology. We have organic compounds in us that tell us what to do and allow us to think and come up with ideas and so on. But it's all based on electric signals between neurons and so on. So I just kind of extrapolated that to, well, they're just doing what we do, but they're doing it in a different shell. They're not organic, they're metallic. And if you have enough connections within a machine, you approach what we are as far as the way we think. Nowadays, we call that AI. I mean, I was not using the phrase AI. I just said to myself, and I kind of made it evident the way I wrote the book, these guys are alive. There's enough complexity to their circuitry that allows them to think and feel and have free will. All right. Just like us. The only difference is we're biological, we're organic, and they are robotic and metallic. Okay. But as far as the level of sophistication of their circuitry, we're comparable. And that was the way I went from there. So I came up with this creation matrix, and one thing I got a lot of criticism for was I wrote an issue where a popped Optimus Prime apparently gets destroyed in a video game bet, but he secretly gets his entire persona, his entire who he is on a floppy disk. And I got over the years, I got some heat on that because the floppy disk, there's hardly any memory on that thing. But whatever, there's a lot of compression back then. Not to say.
Yes.
But anyway, so I think I'm trying to get around to what you're the subject you're broaching, which is I looked at them as being alive, and clearly they didn't procreate like we do. I couldn't figure out how robotic life forms would have sex. What would that mean? And better I stayed away from it. This was books for kids. Well, nowadays I don't think anything's off limits. But in any case, they procreated in different ways. In this case, certain individuals like Optimus Prime, for instance, was given for whatever reason the power to create more robotic life forms by having the creation matrix in him. And I guess that got spun off in different ways in other media, on the animation and so on. So I was just I was playing God, I guess. Coming up with my own thesis of how Transformers life operated. As far as whether it's an evolutionary dead end or not, I guess if I stayed on the book long enough, maybe I would have, gone in that direction and figured out what's the next level of life form in the Transformers evolution would be. But I never got around to that. So, Jamie, did that?
No, that was awesome. Thank you so much.
You covered it, definitely.
Okay, yeah. See, that was very deep.
Thank you.
I should start my own church, I think. A religion based on these theories. Yeah. So,
Right, thank you.
Can I ask one more?
Sure.
Yeah, go Russ.
Okay, so obviously, again, I know it was work and I know it was a long time ago. So you created these characters as well, not just, obviously the toys were already there, but you created the characters and I suppose their traits and their personalities that a lot of us grew up with and grew fond of, etc. So as you created them, because sometimes I think over the years, as you've already mentioned, IDW have had their stint at it. We've obviously had Michael Bay had their stint at it. Sometimes I think that they do change the character traits and personalities too much. Have you ever seen or witnessed something where you've read or seen on a screen and thought, that's not what he should be doing? I'm not happy with how he's behaving, because you obviously created them.
Oh, you're getting into the weeds here. There's too many details. I can't keep track of everything I created.
Okay.
Like the fans out there know far better than I do what I wrote from years ago. So if somebody says, well, you said that, that Mirage can do this and he has this kind of personality, and in the movie he's shown doing that, I don't remember what I wrote. I was just spinning it out. What I was trying to do was come up with, initially 26 characters that were distinct from each other. And then there was another 20 characters. And after a while, I lost track of what I had no idea what I wrote years prior. I wasn't going back on my old notes thinking, I used that word for Thundercracker. I can't use that word here. Somebody will think I'm copying myself. I just, you can't keep track of all this stuff. So my goal was always to present Hasbro with something that they think should work for their purpose, which was here's a cool name that, as you might know, I came up with about 250 names over those 5 years, and here's some cool stuff in the various biographies, the profiles that I wrote for each of these characters. And then I would create an abbreviated version of this profile, and they would put that on the toy packaging. So that was my goal. And at one point early on, Hasbro execs were, I had a meeting. One of them said, so were you ever in the military? And I said, no. He said, well, you use all of these words that, like, where do you get them from? Like all these technical terms. And I said, well, I have an engineering degree. So it was the only time my engineering degree ever came in handy, frankly. some words I would not have known otherwise, and throw them into Transformer bios.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
Sure.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, listen, Bob, I'm going to let the guys all say a thank you as well, but a massive thank you for taking the time to talk to us today. It's been an absolute pleasure. We will let the guys have their chance to say their thank yous. We'll do a little wrap up and close off, but it has been an absolute pleasure speaking to you today. I really look forward to this, and thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Well, it's been a pleasure on my behalf too. It's really been enjoyable answering your questions, talking to all of you. And, it's been great. So, and I want to say also, for the sake of what is it? The
TFUKCon.
TFUKCon. I mean, I hope it's a great event, and say hi to Simon for me. Tell him he owes me a beer.
I'll make sure he knows that. Yeah. Right, gents, I'll go through, let you all have your chance. So, Simon, you're up first on my screen.
Cheers, Bob. Thank you very much for talking to us, and thank you very much for creating, the characters that have been such a big part of all of our lives. And just thank you.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you.
And then I've got Russ.
I think, again, Simon just covered it, but I just wanted to leave you with a little something as well, because I've got some of the best vivid memories ever for waiting for the paperboy on the Saturday morning to deliver that comic to me on a Saturday morning. So, from when I was 5 years old, and I just wanted to, again, thank you in person for that. And again, everybody else has covered all the things, just the memories that you've given me. They're vivid as anything. And it's just a big thank you for that.
Oh, that's very nice of you to say that. Appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem.
Lovely, Russ. Andy?
Sorry, I think you can hear my son barking away. He's got terrible cough at the moment. I just echo what everybody else has said. Just a massive thank you, Bob, because you created something that's been such a massive part of all our lives and that we all really just love. And it has allowed us to all kind of get together and meet each other. And it's just been wonderful. And just like Russell, I remember getting the comic book right from when I was about the same age as Russ was. And it was literally the highlight every time that I got it. And a lot of that is down to you. So thank you very much for everything you've done.
Oh, you're welcome. And I'm glad you found so much enjoyment from the things I did way back then when you were 5 years old.
Thank you.
That's great. Great to hear. Okay.
And then last but not least, again, Jamie.
Yeah, I'm obviously much younger, as you can tell. I'm much more handsome. But knows a lot. But again, I just loved, because I wasn't lazy. I didn't wait for the paperboy. I went to that newsagents and I got that comic and I enjoyed it. It was an entire universe for me. The reading age, it just improved my reading age. Wonderfully written. That I love the use of these words. You had such an impact on me as a youngster. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, and thank you for telling me that. And by the way, I had the same experience when I was that age, a couple decades earlier, perhaps, reading comics. It taught me so much. I learned so much by reading comics. Words, concepts, just really opened up my mind. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Right, so that's us going back to the live TFUKCon, and I'll hand back to the live Moff.